What would you do if you heard your own voice screaming from deep within the Appalachian woods? Welcome to Haunted Fears. Tonight, 11 true deep woods horror stories that will shatter everything you thought you knew about mountain safety. For privacy protection, names and specific details have been changed, but every single story is 100% real. Drop your current location and time in the comments right now. If these stories don't terrify you, nothing will. Hit subscribe and enable notifications because the darkness in these mountains never sleeps. What would you do if you heard your own voice calling for help from somewhere deep in the woods, but you were standing completely alone? Imagine hiking in the Smokies and suddenly questioning if every step is being orchestrated by something hidden, watching and whispering, just for you. My name is Archer, and I'm a landscape photographer based out of Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I've been hiking the Smoky Mountains for 12 years, documenting every season, every trail, every hidden corner that most tourists never see. I know these mountains like I know my own reflection. The trails, the elevation changes, the wildlife patterns, the weather shifts. All of it is second nature to me. I've spent countless nights alone in these woods, and I've never felt afraid. Not once. Not until last October, when the mountains taught me that familiarity breeds a dangerous kind of confidence. It was a Saturday afternoon, perfect hiking weather. The fall colors were at peak brilliance, and I'd planned a solo trek along the Alum Cave Trail to catch sunset from a spot I'd been scouting for months. It was about half a mile off the main trail, nothing too extreme, but remote enough that I'd have the view entirely to myself. I left my truck at the trailhead around 3:30 in the afternoon, giving myself plenty of daylight to get there, set up my equipment, capture the shots I wanted, and return before full darkness set in. The hike out was flawless. The weather held steady. The light was magnificent, and by 5:15 I was positioned at my chosen vantage point, with my tripod set up and my camera ready. For the next 90 minutes, I shot frame after frame of the valley below as the sun painted the ridgelines in shades of amber and crimson. It's moments like those that remind me why I do this work, why I'm willing to carry 40 pounds of gear into remote locations for a handful of perfect images. By 6:45, I was packed up and ready to head back. I had 2 high-powered flashlights, a headlamp with fresh batteries, my GPS unit, and enough experience to navigate these woods blindfolded if necessary. The hike back to the main trail should have taken 40 minutes, maybe 50 in the dark. I'd be at my truck by 8 at the latest, home by 9, uploading photos before bed. But 8 minutes into my return hike, everything changed. Archer. I stopped mid-step, my boot hovering above a cluster of exposed roots. The voice had come from my left, maybe 20 or 30 yards into the trees. It was clear, distinct, and unmistakably calling my name. My first reaction was confusion rather than fear. Another hiker, maybe. Someone who recognized me from town or had seen my name on my truck's bumper sticker. "Hello?" I called back, sweeping my headlamp across the darkening forest. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating tree trunks and undergrowth, but no person. No movement. Nothing. I waited, listening. The forest was quiet except for the usual evening. Sounds, wind through the leaves, the distant murmur of water over rocks, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. No response to my call, no explanation for the voice. I shook it off. Sound travels strangely in mountains. Echoes, wind patterns, the way valleys and ridges channel noise. It can all create auditory illusions. I probably heard another hiker on the main trail below, their voice carried upward by a quirk of geography and timing. It happened. I kept walking, but slower now, more aware of my surroundings. 5 minutes passed. Then I heard it again. "Archer, wait." This time the voice came from behind me, back toward the direction I'd just come from. I spun around fast enough to make my pack swing, my headlamp beam dancing across the trees. Still nothing. Still no one. But this time, something about the voice registered in a way it hadn't before. The tone, the inflection, the slight rasp at the end of my name, it all sounded familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. It sounded like me. Ain't similar, not reminiscent. It sounded exactly like my own voice. "This isn't funny," I shouted into the darkness, trying to inject anger into my words to mask the fear that was starting to creep in. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not playing." Silence. Complete, oppressive silence. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. I checked my GPS. I was still on course, still heading in the right direction toward the main trail. The logical part of my brain said to keep moving, to get back to civilization, to process this weirdness from somewhere safe and well lit. But my hands were shaking as I gripped the GPS device, and a cold knot had formed in my stomach. I forced myself forward. 15 more minutes to the trail. 45 minutes after that to the parking area. I could do this. I'd hiked in worse conditions in more remote locations. This was just my mind playing tricks, my imagination running wild in the dark. Nothing more. But then the voices multiplied. "Archer, over here. Archer, I'm lost. Archer, help me. Archer, please." They came from every direction simultaneously, left, right, ahead, behind, above. All of them my voice. All of them saying different things. Some sounded curious, like I was calling to myself to get my own attention. Others sounded panicked, desperate, terrified. One of them was crying. Somewhere in the darkness surrounding me, I could hear my own voice sobbing. And I was standing completely silent, with my mouth clamped shut. My walk became a jog, then a run. I know better. Every experienced hiker knows better. Running off trail in mountain terrain at night is one of the fastest ways to get yourself killed. Exposed roots, hidden rocks, sudden drop-offs, uneven ground. All of it becomes a death trap when you can't see clearly and you're moving too fast to react. But rationality had abandoned me. All I could think about was getting away from those voices, from the sound of my own terror, being played back to me from the shadows. I crashed through undergrowth, vaulted over fallen logs, ducked under low-hanging branches. My headlamp beam bounced wildly with each step, giving me only fractured glimpses of the terrain ahead. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. The straps of my pack dug into my shoulders as the weight of my equipment slammed against my back with each stride. And the voices kept pace. "Archer, you're running the wrong way. Archer, stop. Archer, it's right behind you. Archer, don't look back." That last one froze something inside me. Don't look back. Why would I say that to myself? What was behind me that I shouldn't see? Every instinct I had screamed at me to keep my eyes forward, to not acknowledge whatever was following me through these woods, wearing my voice like a mask. Then I saw the tree. It was a massive oak with a lightning scar running down its entire trunk. The bark split open to reveal pale wood beneath. I'd photographed this tree dozens of times. I knew exactly where I was, maybe 8 minutes from where I'd left the main trail. Relief flooded through me despite the voices that continued calling my name from the darkness. I pushed harder, found energy reserves I didn't know existed, and burst through a final section of dense brush onto the packed dirt of the Alum Cave Trail. The moment my boots hit that official trail, the voices stopped. All of them. Instantly. Like someone had cut a power cord. I stood there, doubled over, hands on my knees, gasping for air. My headlamp illuminated familiar trail markers. This was real. This was the actual trail. I checked my GPS to confirm. Yes, I was exactly where I needed to be. I didn't run this time. I walked, but fast, my eyes locked on the trail ahead. I didn't look into the trees. I didn't look behind me. I counted my steps to keep my mind occupied, to give myself something to focus on, besides the overwhelming urge to sprint. At step 412, I heard it one final time. Archer. A whisper, right next to my ear. So close I felt breath on my neck, warm and humid and wrong. I didn't stop. I didn't turn. I didn't acknowledge it. I just kept walking, counting steps, focusing on the simple mechanical process of putting one foot in front of the other. For 43 minutes, I walked with something breathing next to my ear, whispering my name over and over in my own voice, and I pretended with every fiber of my being that it wasn't there. When I reached the parking area, my truck sat alone under the dim security light. The moment I stepped from trail to pavement, the presence vanished. I drove home in complete silence, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, taking every turn too carefully, checking my rearview mirror too often. I didn't report what happened. How could I? What would I tell the park rangers? That I heard voices in the woods? That they sounded like me? I'd sound insane, or at best like someone who'd gotten spooked by natural acoustics and an overactive imagination. But 3 weeks later, I was in a local outdoor gear shop when I overheard two rangers talking near the counter. They were discussing a missing hiker, last seen on the Alum Cave Trail 5 days earlier. His family had received a strange emergency call from his phone before it died. The rangers were reviewing the audio, trying to determine his location based on background sounds. When they played it, I dropped the hiking boots I'd been holding. The voice on that recording, calling for help, giving a desperate description of being lost and disoriented, wasn't the missing hiker's voice. It was mine. They never found him. Search teams combed that area for 2 weeks before the operation was called off. And I haven't been back to the Smoky Mountains since. My photography business has suffered. People ask why I don't shoot the fall colors anymore, why I've switched to coastal landscapes and urban architecture. I don't tell them the truth. I don't tell them that some mountains remember you, that some places in the woods learn your voice, your name, your fears. And once they have those things, they use them to call others deeper into the darkness, using you as bait even when you're miles away, safe in your bed, trying to forget the sound of your own voice, crying for help from somewhere you'll never return to. Imagine finding shelter from a blizzard, only to realize the cabin itself is more dangerous than the storm outside. What would you do if the walls started freezing from the inside out, and something was using the ice to communicate with you? My name is Winter, and yes, I'm fully aware of the irony. A woman named Winter nearly freezing to death in the Blue Ridge Mountains makes for a story that sounds too convenient to be true. But I promise you, every word of what I'm about to tell you is exactly what happened in February of last year. I'm a long-distance backpacker, the kind who thrives on solo treks through challenging terrain in harsh conditions. I've camped in sub-zero temperatures across 3 continents. I've survived whiteout conditions in Iceland, ice storms in the Canadian Rockies, and blizzards in the Cascades. The Blue Ridge Mountains in February should have been challenging, but well within my capabilities. I planned a 5-day winter backpacking route through a remote section of the George Washington National Forest. The weather forecast showed a cold front moving in, but nothing I hadn't handled before. Daytime highs in the low 20s, nighttime lows around 5 degrees, possible snow accumulation of 3 to 6 inches. I packed accordingly. 4-season tent, sleeping bag rated to -20, backup everything, emergency beacon, satellite communicator. I filed my route plan with the ranger station and set out on a Tuesday morning with clear skies and perfect visibility. The first 2 days were exactly what I'd hoped for. Pristine snow-covered trails, stunning winter landscapes, and the profound silence that only comes from being truly alone in the wilderness during winter. Most people avoid winter backpacking specifically because of that isolation, but for me, it's the whole point. No crowds, no noise, just you in the mountains and the raw elements. On the 3rd night, everything changed. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning to a sound I'd never heard before. My tent poles creaking under extreme stress. The walls were pressing inward, weighted down by rapidly accumulating snow. The wind had gone from the gentle breeze I'd fallen asleep to a howling monster that sounded like it was trying to rip my tent from its stakes. I checked my weather radio. Static. I checked my satellite communicator. No signal. I checked my thermometer. The temperature had dropped 40 degrees in less than 6 hours. This wasn't the forecasted cold front. This was something else entirely, something that had appeared without warning and was intensifying by the minute. I made the decision every experienced winter backpacker dreads, but knows they might have to make someday. I had to abort the trek and get to lower elevation before conditions became completely unsurvivable. I packed up in near whiteout conditions, my fingers going numb despite 2 layers of gloves. Visibility was down to maybe 10 feet. The wind chill had to be pushing, -30 or worse. According to my map, there was a fire road about 8 miles to the east that would lead me down to a county highway. 8 miles, in a blizzard, with wind that wanted to knock me off my feet every 3rd step. I'd covered maybe 3 miles by noon, moving at a crawl, burning through calories at an unsustainable rate. My water had frozen solid in my pack despite the insulation. My face mask was coated in ice from my own breath. Every exposed inch of skin felt like it was being stabbed with frozen needles. I knew I was in trouble. Real trouble. The kind that gets people killed in the mountains every winter despite their experience and preparation. That's when I saw it through the snow. A small cabin with a stone chimney and a covered porch. It wasn't on my map. It wasn't marked on any trail guide I'd studied. But it was there, solid and real, and it represented shelter. I didn't hesitate. I fought my way through the drifts and practically fell onto the porch, reaching for the door handle with hands that could barely grip anything anymore. The door wasn't locked. It swung inward easily, and I stumbled inside, slamming it shut against the wind behind me. For maybe 10 seconds, I just stood there in the darkness, breathing hard, feeling the relief of being out of that wind. Then my eyes adjusted, and I noticed something that should have sent me right back out into the storm. It was colder inside the cabin than it had been outside. Not slightly colder, dramatically colder. My breath formed thick, heavy clouds in the air. Every surface was covered in a thin layer of frost. The walls, the floor, the single wooden table in the center of the room. The windows were coated in ice on the inside, not the outside. There was an old iron bed frame in one corner, stripped of any mattress or bedding. A fireplace dominated one wall, but it looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Every survival instinct I'd honed over years of backcountry experience was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with this place. But the storm outside was screaming louder. I dropped my pack, pulled out my sleeping bag, and set up my camping stove to make hot water. I needed to warm up from the inside, get calories into my system, and reassess my options. That's when I noticed the frost patterns on the walls weren't random. They formed words. I had to angle my headlamp just right to see them clearly, but once I did, I couldn't look away. Deliberate letters spelled out in thick frost across every wall of the cabin. Stay, don't leave it, wants you outside. My hands froze on my stove controls. I stood slowly, approaching the nearest wall, reaching out to touch the frosted letters. The moment my glove made contact, the temperature dropped even further. My digital thermometer read -12 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside a structure. That was physically impossible. I turned back toward the door, ready to take my chances with the blizzard, but I stopped, dead. The door was covered in solid ice, not frost, but actual ice at least 3 inches thick, coating the entire door and spreading across the frame. I'd been inside for maybe 20 minutes. There was no water source, no explanation for how ice could form that fast and that thick. I grabbed my ice axe and swung at the frozen door. The impact barely left a scratch. I swung again, harder, and managed to chip off a piece the size of a quarter. At this rate, it would take hours to break through, and I could feel the temperature still dropping, my thermometer now reading -18. I spun around, scanning for another exit. 2 windows, one on the east wall, one on the west. I moved to the eastern window and cleared the interior frost with my axe handle. Through the glass, I could see the storm still raging. But I could also see something else that made my blood run colder than the air around me. dark shapes stood motionless in the snow about 30 feet from the cabin. There were 3 of them. They weren't moving, weren't being buffeted by the wind that was strong enough to bend trees. They were just standing there, facing the cabin, facing me, and even through the snow and limited visibility, I could see enough to know they weren't human. Too tall, arms too long, heads tilted at angles that no living person could sustain. I backed away and checked the western window. 2 more shapes, same impossible stillness, same wrong proportions. The frost on the walls began to change. New words formed, spreading across the surface like invisible fingers were writing them in real time. They've been waiting storm, brings them cabin, keeps them out. I watched in numb horror as more text appeared. But cabin needs. Cold, cold keeps them away, you brought heat. I looked at my camping stove, still running, pumping warm air into the space. I looked at my body, radiating heat, fighting against the cold with every breath. And I understood something terrible. The cabin wasn't trying to trap me. It was trying to protect me. But my presence, my warmth, my very existence as a living person generating heat was weakening whatever barrier kept those things outside from getting in. I made a decision that went against every survival principle I'd ever learned. I turned off my stove. I unzipped my sleeping bag and spread it flat, eliminating its insulation. I removed my heavy jacket, my mid-layer fleece, my insulated vest, stripping down to a single base layer. Then I sat down in the center of the cabin floor and forced myself to stop fighting the cold. The agony was immediate and overwhelming. Cold invaded my body like a living thing, biting into my skin, sinking into my muscles, making my bones ache with a pain I'd never experienced. My teeth chattered so violently, I thought they'd shatter. My entire body shook with violent shivers, my metabolism desperately trying to generate warmth. But I didn't move. I didn't reach for my jacket. I just sat there and let myself freeze, and the cabin responded. The ice on the door grew thicker. The frost on the walls expanded, spreading until every surface was coated in crystalline white. The temperature plummeted past what my thermometer could measure. But the frost kept forming words. Good stay. Still they're trying to get in. I could hear them now, scratching sounds on the walls, on the roof, on the windows, heavy impacts that shook the entire structure. The shapes outside pressed against the glass, and through the ice I could see details I wished I couldn't. Faces that were almost human, but stretched and distorted like reflections in a funhouse mirror. Eyes too large and completely black. Mouths that opened too wide, showing too many teeth arranged in patterns that didn't match any animal I'd ever seen. They wanted in. They wanted me. And the only thing standing between us was the cold. I don't know how long I sat there. Time became meaningless. I was so cold, I'd stopped shivering, which I knew was a terrible sign, the indication that my body was giving up on trying to warm itself. Hypothermia advancing to critical stages, but every time I thought about reaching for my jacket, more frost would form. Not yet almost dawn. They leave at dawn. So I waited. I waited while my extremities went numb. I waited while my core temperature dropped. I waited while those things outside battered the cabin, while their scratching grew more frantic, while their impacts came faster and harder. I waited while my mind started to drift, while I began losing track of where I was and why I was so cold. And then suddenly, it all stopped. The scratching ceased. The impacts ended. I forced my frozen neck to turn, forced my barely functioning eyes to focus on the windows. The shapes were gone. Outside, the faintest hint of dawnlight touched the horizon. The storm was weakening. New words formed on the walls. Go now, fast before they return. I don't remember getting dressed. I don't remember packing. My body moved on pure survival instinct. My frozen fingers somehow managing to zip my jacket, shoulder my pack. The ice on the door had thinned just enough for me to kick through. I burst out into the dying storm and ran on legs that could barely feel the ground beneath them. I reached the fire road by mid-morning. A park ranger found me around 11, delirious, and suffering from severe hypothermia. I spent 6 days in the hospital. I lost 2 toes and the tips of 3 fingers to frostbite. When I was released, I went back with rangers to show them the cabin. We had exact GPS coordinates from my tracking device, but when we reached the location, there was nothing there. No cabin, no foundation, no evidence any structure had ever existed. But in the snow, still preserved, were tracks. Dozens of them, circling where the cabin should have been. The wildlife experts couldn't identify what made them. I know what made them, and I know that cabin saved my life. But sometimes, late at night, I still see frost, forming words on my bedroom walls. You brought them back with you. What would you do if you realized the cave you were exploring was somehow alive and didn't want you to leave? Imagine descending into darkness, only to discover that the walls are breathing and something organic is growing between you and the exit. My name is Silas, and I'm a spelunker, a cave explorer. For 8 years, I've been mapping unexplored cave systems across the eastern United States, documenting geological formations, taking samples, and pushing into places where no human has ever set foot. It's not a hobby for most people. The darkness, the tight spaces, the constant awareness that you're surrounded by millions of tons of rock, it filters out anyone who isn't completely committed. But for me, there's nothing more thrilling than being the first person to see a chamber that's been hidden from the world for thousands of years. In March of last year, I got a tip from a local caver in West Virginia about a newly discovered entrance to what appeared to be a massive, unexplored system in the Appalachians. The entrance had been revealed by a recent rock slide, and preliminary exploration suggested it connected to a network that could stretch for miles. I assembled a team of 3 experienced cavers, people I'd worked with before, people I trusted with my life underground. There was Rivera, a geologist with 15 years of caving experience. There was Phoenix, a photographer who specialized in underground environments. And there was Knox, our safety officer, and the most cautious person I'd ever met in the caving community. If Knox said something was unsafe, we didn't do it. No arguments, no exceptions. We arrived at the site on a Thursday morning, checked and double-checked our gear, reviewed our emergency protocols, and entered the cave system at 10:15 a.m. The plan was simple: a 6-hour exploratory push, mapping as we went, taking samples of interesting formations, and establishing a baseline for future deeper expeditions. We had backup lights, backup batteries, backup communication devices, backup everything. We'd filed our plans with local authorities. We'd done everything right. The first 2 hours were spectacular. The cave was pristine. No evidence of previous human presence, no trash, no graffiti, no disturbed formations. We moved through a series of chambers that ranged from cathedral-sized rooms with stunning stalactites to narrow passages that required crawling. Phoenix was in heaven, photographing formations that would end up in scientific journals. Rivera was collecting mineral samples and muttering excitedly about geological processes. Even Knox seemed relaxed, which for him meant he wasn't actively suggesting we turn back. We were about 2 miles in, roughly 400 feet below the surface, when I noticed something strange. The walls were wet. That's not unusual in cave systems. Moisture is everywhere underground. But this was different. The wetness wasn't water. It was thicker, more viscous, and it had a faint, organic smell, like mushrooms or decay. I stopped the team and examined it more closely with my headlamp. The substance coating the walls looked almost like mucus. It glistened in our lights, and when I touched it with a gloved finger, it was warm. Not cool like cave water. Warm, like body temperature. Anyone else seeing this? I asked, keeping my voice level. Rivera moved closer, examining the walls with a professional eye. I've never seen anything like this. It could be some kind of bacterial colony or slime mold, but the temperature is all wrong. Caves maintain a constant temperature, and biological matter should match that. This is at least 70 degrees. Phoenix started photographing it, her camera flash illuminating the passage ahead. That's when we all saw it at the same time. The walls ahead of us were moving. Not dramatically, not obviously, but there was a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction like the cave was breathing. Knox's voice came through our communication headsets, tight and controlled. "We need to reassess. This is outside normal parameters." I agreed, but I also knew we needed more information. "Let's move forward 50 feet, document what we're seeing, and then we'll make a decision about whether to continue or abort." We advanced slowly, and the breathing motion became more pronounced. The walls expanded outward, then contracted inward, in a steady rhythm of about 8 breaths per minute. The organic coating grew thicker, and in places it hung from the ceiling in strands that reminded me unnervingly of mucous membranes. That's when Phoenix touched one of the strands. She didn't mean to. She was adjusting her camera, and one of the hanging formations brushed against her exposed neck, just above her collar. The reaction was immediate. The entire cave shuddered, like we'd triggered some kind of reflex. The breathing rhythm accelerated, and the walls began secreting more of the organic substance at a visible rate. "Phoenix, are you okay?" I asked, watching her closely. "Yeah, I'm fine. It just startled me. It felt warm, and—" She stopped mid-sentence, her hand going to her throat. "Does anyone else smell that?" I did. We all did. A sweet, cloying smell that reminded me of overripe fruit and something else I couldn't quite identify. Something chemical. Within seconds, my head started to feel light, disconnected. I looked at Rivera and saw her swaying slightly on her feet. "Gas," Knox said sharply. "Unknown biological agent. We need to exit now." We turned to head back, moving as quickly as safety allowed, but something was wrong. The passage we'd just come through didn't look the same. The walls were closer together, narrower than they'd been minutes before, and they were still contracting. "The cave is closing," Rivera said, her voice rising with the first edge of panic I'd ever heard from her. "It's actually closing around us." She was right. The breathing motion had changed. Instead of gentle expansion and contraction, the walls were now contracting steadily, slowly, but unmistakably reducing the size of the passage. What had been a comfortable walkway was becoming a narrow corridor. In places, we had to turn sideways to fit through spaces that had been wide enough to walk through shoulder to shoulder just minutes before. And the smell was getting stronger. My vision started to blur at the edges. Phoenix stumbled, and I caught her arm. Her pupils were dilated, unfocused. "We're being drugged," I said, the realization cutting through the mental fog. "The cave is releasing something into the air, some kind of spore or gas." Knox pulled out our emergency respirators, and we each strapped one on, but I wasn't sure if we'd already absorbed too much of whatever was in the air. My movements felt sluggish, delayed. Time seemed to be moving strangely, seconds stretching into minutes, or maybe minutes compressing into seconds. I couldn't tell anymore. We pushed forward, or was it backward, toward where the entrance should be. But the cave had changed. Passages that should have been familiar looked different. The organic coating was everywhere now, coating every surface in a thick, glistening layer. And it was moving, slowly pulsing, like we were inside something living, because we were inside something living. The realization hit me with a clarity that cut through the drugged confusion. This wasn't a cave with unusual biological features. This was an organism, a massive, ancient organism that had somehow grown into or become part of the cave system. We hadn't entered a geological formation. We'd entered a body, and it knew we were here. "The entrance," Rivera gasped, pointing ahead. I could see natural light filtering through the darkness, maybe 100 feet ahead. Hope surged through me, despite the overwhelming drowsiness trying to drag me down. We stumbled toward it, supporting Phoenix between us. She'd inhaled more of whatever the cave was releasing, and she could barely walk. The light grew brighter, Closer. 50 feet. 30 feet. 20 feet. Then the walls began to close faster. The breathing rhythm accelerated to something frantic, panicked even. The organic substance started to solidify, becoming thicker, more rope-like. Strands of it stretched across the passage ahead of us like a web, blocking our path to the entrance. Knox pulled out his knife and started cutting through the strands, but more appeared faster than he could clear them. The walls were now contracting fast enough that I could see the movement, closing like a throat swallowing. We had minutes at best before the passage became too narrow to navigate. "Leave the gear," I shouted. "Everything except lights. Move." We dropped our packs, our sampling equipment, everything that slowed us down. Knox cut a path through the organic webbing, while Rivera and I dragged Phoenix forward. The entrance was right there, tantalizingly close, natural daylight streaming in. But the opening was shrinking, the cave literally trying to seal itself with us inside. Knox made it through first, then turned to help pull Phoenix through the rapidly narrowing gap. Rivera went next, having to turn sideways and exhale completely to fit through the opening. I was last, and by the time I reached the entrance, the gap was barely wider than my shoulders. I squeezed through, feeling the wet, warm walls pressing against me from both sides, feeling the organic substance coating my clothes and exposed skin. For a terrible moment, I thought I was stuck, thought the cave was going to hold me there while it finished closing. But Knox and Rivera grabbed my arms and pulled, and I scraped through the opening just as it contracted to the size of a basketball. We collapsed on the rocky ground outside, gasping for air, watching in horror as the cave entrance we'd walked through just hours before sealed itself completely. The rock face looked solid, natural, like there had never been an opening there at all. Phoenix was unconscious but breathing. We called for emergency services, and she was airlifted to a hospital where she spent 3 days in intensive care, being treated for exposure to unknown biological toxins. The rest of us underwent extensive medical testing. They found spores in our lungs, spores that didn't match any known fungal or bacterial species. The CDC took samples. Multiple agencies got involved. Everyone had questions we couldn't answer. A week later, a team of scientists went back to investigate the site. They found the rock face exactly as we'd left it, completely solid, no evidence of any cave entrance. Ground-penetrating radar showed no hollow spaces behind it. It was like the cave system had never existed. But our gear is still in there. Our packs, our sampling equipment, Phoenix's cameras with hundreds of photos of what we saw. All of it sealed inside something that was alive, something that breathed and thought and defended itself when it detected threats. Sometimes I wake up at night feeling like the walls of my bedroom are contracting, like I'm still inside that cave, slowly being digested. Phoenix refuses to go underground anymore. Rivera changed careers entirely. Knox still caves, but he won't go anywhere in the Appalachians, won't even drive through West Virginia. And sometimes, when I'm alone and it's very quiet, I swear I can still smell that sweet cloying scent, and I wonder if we really got all of those spores out of our lungs, or if something is still growing inside us, waiting, breathing, remembering the cave that tried to keep us forever. The Vanishing Camp location, Cherokee National Forest, Tennessee. Imagine going to sleep in your tent and waking up somewhere completely different, with no memory of how you got there. What would you do if your campsite kept moving on its own, dragging you deeper into restricted territory while you slept? My name is Rowan, and I'm a wilderness survival instructor. I teach people how to stay alive in the backcountry, how to read terrain, how to navigate without technology, how to remain calm when everything goes wrong. I've spent more nights alone in the wilderness than most people spend in hotels over their entire lifetime. I'm comfortable in isolation. I trust my skills. I know how to handle myself when things get unpredictable, but Nothing in my 20 years of outdoor experience prepared me for what happened in Cherokee National Forest last September. I'd planned a solo 10-day primitive camping trip, no tent, no stove, just a tarp, a sleeping bag, basic tools, and my knowledge. It was supposed to be a reset, a way to disconnect completely and test some new wilderness techniques I'd been developing for my advanced courses. I filed my itinerary with the ranger station marking my intended camping zones on a topographical map. All of them were in approved backcountry areas, well within legal boundaries. The first 2 days were perfect. I set up camp in a small clearing near a creek, built a debris shelter, established a fire pit, and settled into the rhythm of wilderness living. No phone, no watch, no connection to the outside world. Just me, the forest, and the basic tasks of survival: gathering water, processing firewood, preparing food, maintaining my camp. On the third night, I went to sleep around 9 p.m., exhausted from a day of hiking and foraging. I'd positioned my shelter carefully, 30 feet from the creek to avoid flood risk, under a large oak for wind protection, with clear sight lines in all directions. I'd even placed small sticks and leaves in specific patterns around my camp perimeter, an old trick to detect if animals or people approached while I slept. I woke up at dawn feeling disoriented, like I'd had too much to drink the night before, even though I'd consumed nothing but creek water. My head was foggy, my sense of balance slightly off, but what really confused me was the view. My shelter was still intact. My gear was exactly where I'd left it, but the landscape was wrong. Instead of being 30 feet from the creek, I was at least 200 yards away. I could hear the water, distant now instead of the close burble I'd fallen asleep to. The oak tree that had been sheltering my camp was gone, replaced by a cluster of pine trees I didn't remember. And the clearing itself was different, bigger, with different vegetation patterns. I stood up slowly, scanning the area, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My first thought was that I'd sleepwalked, somehow packed up my entire camp and relocated in an unconscious state. But that was impossible. My shelter was a fixed structure built from branches and forest debris. It couldn't be moved without completely disassembling it. And all my gear, my pack, my tools, my food cache, everything was arranged exactly as I'd left it. Nothing was disturbed. I pulled out my GPS unit, something I carried for emergencies, even though I rarely used it. The coordinates showed I was roughly 200 yards northwest of where I'd fallen asleep. According to the device, I hadn't moved, but according to the device's log, my campsite location had somehow shifted during the night. That didn't make sense. GPS coordinates are fixed. They don't change. Either I'd moved or the GPS was malfunctioning. I spent an hour trying to rationalize it. Maybe I'd been more tired than I realized. Maybe I'd set up camp in a different spot than I remembered. Maybe my sense of direction had been off. But none of those explanations fit the evidence. I decided to stay put for another night to see if it happened again. If it did, I'd know something genuinely strange was occurring and I'd abort the trip. I reset my camp perimeter markers, making them more elaborate this time, and I tied a cord from my wrist to a tree, thinking that if I was somehow sleepwalking, the cord would wake me. That night, I barely slept. Every sound jerked me toward consciousness. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch, every nightbird call had me reaching for my headlamp. But nothing happened. No animals approached, no people wandered by. Nothing disturbed my camp. And yet, when dawn came, I was somewhere else again. This time I'd moved nearly a quarter mile. I was in a completely different part of the forest, in terrain I definitely hadn't explored. The cord I'd tied to my wrist was still attached to a tree, but it was a different tree, in a different location. My perimeter markers were undisturbed, still in their exact positions relative to my camp. It was as if my entire campsite, the ground itself, had been picked up and relocated while I slept. I checked my GPS. The coordinates had changed again, showing me even further northwest than before. But more disturbing was the log. According to the device's tracking history, I hadn't walked here. The GPS showed a straight line from my previous location to my current one, as if I'd teleported. Fear crept in then, cold and insistent. This wasn't exhaustion or confusion. This was something fundamentally wrong with reality itself, or with the specific part of the forest. I decided to leave immediately, to hike back to the trailhead and get out of Cherokee National Forest. But when I checked my map and GPS to plot the fastest route out, I saw something that made my stomach drop. I was no longer in approved backcountry territory. At some point during the relocations, my camp had moved into a restricted zone, an area marked clearly on every map as closed to public access. No camping, no hiking, no entry without special permits. I'd been moved onto forbidden ground. I packed up quickly, determined to hike out before anyone discovered I was in a restricted area. I didn't want to lose my wilderness permits or face fines for trespassing, even though I hadn't entered the zone deliberately. I oriented myself southeast toward the nearest trail that would lead me out and started walking. I hiked for 6 hours straight, maintaining a steady pace, following my GPS religiously. According to the device, I covered nearly 8 miles. I should have been well clear of the restricted zone, should have intersected with a marked trail around hour 4. But the forest just continued, unchanging, with no trails, no markers, no signs of the boundary I should have crossed. As the sun began to set, I had to make a decision I dreaded. I had to stop and make camp for the night. I couldn't safely navigate in the dark, and I was exhausted from the hiking and the stress. I set up in a small clearing, but this time I didn't build a shelter. I just laid out my sleeping bag and forced myself to stay awake, determined to witness whatever was happening. I lasted until about midnight before exhaustion dragged me under. My last conscious thought was a prayer that I'd wake up in the same spot. I didn't. Dawn found me in yet another location, but this time something was different. There were other camps visible through the trees, not active camps, abandoned ones. I could see the remnants of shelters, cold fire pits, scattered gear. I approached the nearest one cautiously and felt my skin crawl. The shelter design was similar to mine. Debris construction, efficient layout. The gear scattered around looked professional, high-quality equipment that no experienced camper would abandon. And there was a journal, water-damaged but readable, sitting next to a rotted backpack. I opened it and read the first entry. Day 3 in Cherokee National Forest. Camp keeps moving while I sleep. Trying to hike out but can't find the boundary. If anyone finds this. The entries continued for 7 more days, each one more desperate, more confused, more terrified. The final entry, barely legible, just said, "It's collecting us. Don't fall asleep in the forest." I looked around at the other abandoned camps, counting at least 5 visible from where I stood. How many people had this happened to? How many had never made it out? I ran. I didn't pack, didn't think, just ran in the direction my GPS indicated was southeast. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, and when I collapsed, I forced myself to get up and run more. I couldn't let myself fall asleep, not here, not in whatever this place was. As dusk approached, I saw it. A road. An actual paved road cutting through the forest. I stumbled onto it, sobbing with relief, and followed it until I saw headlights. A park ranger's vehicle. I flagged it down, and the ranger's expression shifted from concern to confusion to alarm as I babbled my story. They took me to the ranger station where I tried to explain what had happened. They were professional, kind, but clearly skeptical. They checked the coordinates I provided for the abandoned camps, and their faces went carefully neutral. Those coordinates were in an area that had been closed to the public for 15 years, ever since a series of mysterious disappearances. They never found the abandoned camps when they searched. They never found any evidence of what I'd experienced, but they did find something interesting in their records. 12 missing persons over the past 20 years, all experienced campers, all last seen in Cherokee National Forest, all in the same general area where I'd been relocated. I haven't been back to Cherokee. I still teach wilderness survival, but I'm very careful now about where I take students, and I never, ever recommend solo primitive camping in national forests with histories of disappearances, because I know now that some places in the wilderness are hungry. They don't want you to leave. They'll move you while you sleep, drag you deeper into restricted zones where no one will look for you, surround you with the camps of others who couldn't escape. And eventually, when you're too exhausted to run anymore, when you finally fall asleep in the wrong spot, you become another abandoned camp for the next person to find. I was lucky. I woke up near a road, but sometimes late at night, I still wake up feeling disoriented, checking my surroundings compulsively to make sure I'm still in my own bedroom, still in the same place I fell asleep, because part of me will never stop wondering if that forest is done with me, or if one night I'll close my eyes in my bed and wake up back in those woods, part of a collection that never stops growing. The rescue. That wasn't location, Mount Mitchell, North Carolina. Have you ever been rescued by someone who insisted you were the one who wasn't real? Picture this. You're lost on a mountain, a search team finds you, but the person they're rescuing claims they've been watching you search for them for days, and you only just arrived. My name is Haven, and I work as a paramedic on a volunteer search and rescue team in North Carolina. I've been doing this for 6 years, responding to calls about lost hikers, injured climbers, people who wandered off trail and couldn't find their way back. Most rescues are straightforward. Locate the person, assess their condition, guide them to safety, or call for medical evacuation if needed. It's demanding work, sometimes dangerous, but it follows predictable patterns. You train for scenarios, you execute protocols, you bring people home. What happened on Mount Mitchell last November didn't follow any pattern I'd ever encountered. It didn't follow any pattern that should exist in reality. The call came in on a Friday evening around 6 p.m. A solo female hiker had activated her emergency beacon near the summit of Mount Mitchell, the highest peak east of the Mississippi. Her beacon signal was strong and stationary, which suggested she was injured and couldn't move. Weather conditions were deteriorating, temperature dropping, wind picking up, visibility decreasing. We had maybe a 4-hour window to reach her before conditions became too dangerous for rescue operations. Our team assembled quickly. There were 4 of us, myself, a team leader named Marcus with 15 years of experience, a wilderness medic named Chen, and a younger rescue volunteer named Tyler, who was on his 3rd mission. We loaded our gear, reviewed the coordinates, and started up the mountain at 6:45 p.m. The hike to her location should have taken about 2.5 hours. The trail was well maintained, and even in deteriorating conditions, we were experienced enough to move efficiently. We maintained communication with base, updating our position every 30 minutes. Everything was proceeding normally. We reached the coordinates at 9:20 p.m. The beacon signal was strong. We were within 50 feet of her location. We spread out, sweeping the area with our high-powered searchlights, calling out to let her know rescue had arrived. Tyler found her first. "Over here, I've got her." She was standing at the edge of a rocky outcrop, perfectly still, staring down into the valley below. Not sitting, not lying down, injured, standing upright, facing away from us. That was our first indication that something was wrong. People who activate emergency beacons because they're injured don't usually stand at cliff edges. "Ma'am," I called out as we approached carefully. "We're search and rescue. You activated an emergency beacon. Are you injured?" She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge us at all, just kept staring into the darkness of the valley below. Marcus and I exchanged glances. Possible hypothermia, possible head injury, possible psychological break. We'd seen all of it before. We approached slowly, non-threateningly, using calm voices. "Ma'am, my name is Haven. I'm a paramedic. We're here to help you. Can you tell me your name?" She finally turned around, and what I saw in her face made me instinctively step back. It wasn't fear or pain or confusion. It was something else entirely. Recognition mixed with anger mixed with something that looked almost like relief. "You're not real," she said flatly. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "You're not actually here." "I assure you we're very real," Marcus said gently. "We received your emergency signal. We're here to take you off the mountain. Are you injured? Are you in pain?" She laughed, a sound that had no humor in it. "I've been watching you search for me for 3 days. I've watched you walk right past me dozens of times. I've screamed at you, waved my arms, tried to touch you. You never saw me. You never heard me. And now, suddenly you can see me." The four of us looked at each other. This was worse than we'd thought. She was clearly experiencing severe confusion, possibly exposure-related psychosis. We needed to get her warm, assess her physical condition, and evacuate her immediately. "Ma'am, I need you to understand that we just arrived," I said carefully. "We received your emergency signal about 2.5 hours ago. We hiked up here to find you. This is the first time we've been in this location." "Liar." The word came out sharp, certain. "I've been here since Tuesday. Today is Friday. I've watched search teams, your search teams, come through this area for 3 days. I saw you." She pointed directly at Marcus. "You were here yesterday morning with a different group. You walked within 10 feet of where I was sitting. I screamed your name. You looked right through me." Marcus's face had gone pale. "I wasn't on a mission yesterday. I was at my daughter's school play. And you," she turned to Chen, "you were here Wednesday afternoon. You stopped right there," she pointed to a spot about 20 feet away, "to drink water. I ran up to you. I grabbed your arm. My hand went through you like you were made of smoke." Chen's voice was tight. "I haven't been on Mount Mitchell in 3 weeks." This was escalating in a dangerous direction. We needed to de-escalate, focus on getting her stable and off the mountain. But she wasn't done. "I've been trapped here," she continued, her voice rising. "I can see other hikers sometimes, but they can't see me. I can see search teams, but I can't interact with them. It's like I'm a ghost in my own life. And now, suddenly you four can see me, can hear me, and you're trying to tell me you just arrived, that I'm the one who's confused." "Let's start with basics," I said, trying to regain control of the situation. "What's your name?" "Jade. Jade Morrison. I'm from Asheville. I came up here Tuesday morning for a day hike. I got disoriented near the summit, activated my beacon around noon Tuesday. And then you all started showing up, search teams, helicopters, dogs. But none of you could see me. I thought I'd died. I thought I was actually dead, and didn't realize it. I pulled out my radio. Base, this is Team 4. We've located the subject. Female, early 30s, mobile, appears uninjured but displaying signs of confusion and possible exposure-related psychosis. Requesting information on missing person reports for a Jade Morrison from Asheville." The response came back within minutes, and the words made my skin crawl. "Team 4, we show an active missing person case for Jade Morrison, age 32, from Asheville. Reported missing by family on Wednesday morning when she failed to return from a day hike on Mount Mitchell. Emergency beacon was activated Tuesday at 12:15 p.m. Multiple search operations have been conducted over the past 3 days with negative results. You're saying you've located her?" I looked at Jade, at her dirty clothes that showed 3 days of wear, at her face that showed 3 days of fear and exposure, at her hands that trembled with exhaustion and cold. Then I looked at my team, all of whom had gone very quiet. "Confirmed," I said into the radio. "We have visual contact and verbal communication with the subject." "Team 4, please confirm, have there been any unusual circumstances in this rescue? Any anomalies?" Marcus took the radio from me. "Base, subject claims she's been visible at this location for 3 days and that previous search teams have been unable to see or hear her, despite being in close proximity. Subject appears physically consistent with 3 days of exposure. Request immediate guidance." The silence from base lasted longer than it should have. When the response came, the voice sounded carefully controlled. Team 4, maintain position. Do not attempt to move the subject. Additional personnel are being dispatched to your location. ETA 45 minutes. Base, weather conditions are deteriorating. Subject needs immediate medical evacuation. Team 4, I repeat, maintain current position. Do not move the subject. This is not a request. We stood there, in the cold and the growing wind. The 5 of us, not understanding what was happening, but knowing it was something far outside our training. Jade was shivering now, and I gave her my jacket despite the strange orders we'd received. "Why can you see me now?" she asked quietly. "What changed?" None of us had an answer. We waited in uncomfortable silence until we saw lights approaching, not just another search team, but people in different uniforms. Federal agents, or something similar. They had equipment I didn't recognize. One of them, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen things that broke normal categories, approached Jade directly. "Ms. Morrison, I'm Dr. Reeves. I need you to answer some questions. When did you first notice that people couldn't see you?" "Tuesday afternoon, after I activated my beacon." "And before that? Did anything unusual happen? Did you experience any strange sensations? See anything out of the ordinary?" Jade's face changed, remembering something. There was a light, right before I got disoriented. A light in the forest that didn't move like a normal light. It was pulsing, and when I got close to it, I felt strange, disconnected, and then everything shifted, and people started not seeing me. Dr. Reeves nodded like this confirmed something she already suspected. She turned to us. "Your team needs to leave the mountain immediately. Don't discuss what you've seen here. Don't include certain details in your reports. You'll receive specific instructions." "What's happening to her?" I asked. "What's wrong with her?" "Nothing is wrong with her," Dr. Reeves said. "She's been existing in a slightly different phase of reality for 3 days. Your team happened to arrive at a moment when the phases aligned enough for mutual perception. It's temporary. If you'd arrived an hour earlier or later, you wouldn't have seen her at all." "That's impossible," Chen said. "And yet here we are," Dr. Reeves replied. "Now leave, quickly, before the alignment shifts and you get caught in the wrong phase yourselves." We didn't argue. We hiked down that mountain faster than safety protocols recommended, and none of us spoke until we were back in the parking lot. Our official reports listed the rescue as successful, subject located, and transferred to specialized medical personnel. We never saw Jade again. We never received follow-up information. But sometimes, when I'm on search operations now, I wonder about the people we don't find. The ones whose beacons we track, but whose bodies never appear. The ones who vanish completely, leaving no trace. I wonder if they're still out there, trapped in phases of reality we can't perceive, watching us search for them while we walk right past, unable to see them, unable to help. And I wonder if one day I'll be the one who slips between the phases screaming for rescue while the world walks through me like I'm made of smoke, like I never existed at all. Picture yourself walking forward for 8 hours straight, covering 15 miles according to your fitness tracker, but passing the same carved tree every 30 minutes. What if you weren't going in circles? What if the trail itself was caught in an endless loop and you were just one of many trapped inside it? My name is Sierra, and I'm a long-distance trail runner, not the casual kind who jogs a few miles on weekends. I compete in ultramarathons, 50-mile races through mountain terrain that most people wouldn't attempt on foot. I've run trails across the country, pushed my body to its absolute limits, and I know the difference between physical exhaustion and something fundamentally wrong with reality. What happened to me in the Allegheny Mountains last May was not exhaustion. It was something else entirely. I'd planned a solo training run on the Laurel Highlands Trail, a 70-mile route I'd run sections of before but never completed in one push. My goal was ambitious: cover the entire distance in under 24 hours, testing my endurance and navigation skills. I started at dawn on a Saturday morning, my pack loaded with hydration, nutrition gels, a GPS watch, and emergency supplies. The weather was perfect, my body felt strong, and the first 10 miles went exactly as planned. The trail was well marked with yellow blazes painted on trees every 100 yards or so. I maintained a steady pace, hitting my mile markers on schedule, enjoying the rhythm of footfalls and breathing that every distance runner knows. By mile 12, I was in that beautiful zone where your body takes over and your mind can drift, where running feels effortless and meditative. That's when I noticed the tree. It was distinctive. A large oak with someone's initials carved deep into the bark, MK plus TR, inside a crooked heart. Below it, someone had carved 2019. I registered it as I passed, the way you register details on a long run without really thinking about them. Just another landmark on a trail full of landmarks. 30 minutes later, I passed it again. My first thought was that I'd somehow gotten turned around, doubled back without realizing it. But that didn't make sense. I'd been following the yellow blazes continuously. I'd been moving forward the entire time, never backtracking, never taking any side trails. And my GPS watch showed I'd covered another 2 miles since first seeing that tree. I stopped and studied my watch more carefully. According to the device, I was 2 miles further along the trail than I'd been when I first saw the carved initials. But according to my eyes, I was standing in front of the exact same tree looking at the exact same carving. I even checked the details, the crooked heart, the specific way the letters were formed, a small knot in the bark just above the 2019. It was identical. I shook it off. Probably 2 similar trees with the same carving. Couples carved their initials in multiple places. It was a coincidence. I kept running. 30 minutes later, I passed it again. Same tree, same carving, same knot in the bark. This time, I stopped completely and checked my GPS coordinates against my trail map. According to the GPS, I'd now covered 16 miles. I should be approaching a creek crossing, a section of the trail I knew well from previous runs. But instead, I was standing in front of this tree for the 3rd time. I looked ahead and behind me on the trail. Everything appeared normal. Packed dirt path, yellow blazes marking the route, dense forest on both sides. No visual indication that anything was wrong. But I'd definitely passed this same spot 3 times in 90 minutes, while my GPS insisted I'd been moving forward continuously. I decided to mark the tree. I pulled out a piece of bright orange surveyor's tape from my emergency kit and tied it around a branch near the carved initials. Then I set a timer on my watch for exactly 30 minutes and started running again, paying close attention to every detail of the trail. I counted my steps. I noted landmarks, specific rock formations, unusual tree shapes, a fallen log covered in bright green moss. I watched my GPS coordinates change with every 1/10 of a mile. Everything suggested I was making forward progress along the trail. When my timer went off, I looked up. The tree with orange surveyor's tape was directly in front of me. My heart rate spiked, and it had nothing to do with physical exertion. I stopped and stared at that orange tape, at the carved initials below it, trying to make sense of what was happening. According to my GPS, I'd covered another 2 miles. According to reality, I'd just completed a perfect loop back to my starting point. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but I had no signal. Not unusual in the mountains, but frustrating given the circumstances. I checked my map again, trying to find an explanation. Maybe the trail looped back on itself in a way that wasn't clearly marked. But no. The Laurel Highlands Trail was a point-to-point route, not a loop. It shouldn't be possible to return to the same spot by continuing forward. That's when I saw the other runner. She appeared from around a bend ahead of me, moving at a steady pace. The first human I'd seen in hours. Relief flooded through me. Another person meant I could confirm I wasn't losing my mind, could ask if she'd experienced anything strange. "Hey," I called out, waving to get her attention. She didn't acknowledge me, just kept running with the focused expression of someone deep in their own rhythm. As she got closer, I noticed she was wearing a distinctive bright purple running jacket and had her dark hair pulled back in a French braid. She ran past me without slowing down, without making eye contact, like I wasn't even there. I turned to call after her, but she'd already disappeared around the bend behind me. Frustrated and increasingly unnerved, I decided to try something different. Instead of running, I walked. Slowly, paying attention to every single detail of the trail, counting my steps, looking for any indication of where the loop might be occurring. I walked for 45 minutes, covering what should have been about 2 miles at my walking pace. My GPS confirmed the distance, and then I reached the tree again. The orange tape fluttered in the breeze, mocking me. This time, someone else was there. A man in his 50s, standing exactly where I'd been standing, staring at the carved initials, with an expression of confused horror I recognized immediately. "You're stuck too," I said. It wasn't a question. He jumped, startled, then nodded slowly. "How long have you been here?" "About 3 hours. I keep ending up at this tree no matter which direction I go." "You?" "5 hours," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I've passed this tree 11 times. I thought I was having a stroke or something, that my brain was malfunctioning. But you see it too." "I see it too. I'm Sierra. Levi." He gestured at the trail ahead. "I've tried running forward, walking forward, even walking backward, thinking maybe the trail was somehow reversed. Always end up here. My GPS says I've covered 22 miles, but I've been going in a loop the entire time." "Have you seen other people?" I asked. His face changed. "Yes. A woman in a purple jacket. She ran right past me like I wasn't here. The same woman I'd seen." "When?" "First time was about 2 hours ago, but I've seen her 3 times now. Same purple jacket, same braid, same focused expression. She's stuck in the loop too, but she can't see us. Or we can't see each other at the same time. I don't know." A terrible possibility occurred to me. What if we're all experiencing different versions of the same loop? What if there are dozens of people stuck here, all passing the same landmarks, but we can only see each other occasionally, when something aligns? Levi pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. "I took this an hour ago. Look in the background." I zoomed in on the image. Behind Levi, barely visible, were shadowy figures on the trail. Lots of them. Maybe 20 people, all walking or running, all translucent like ghosts. "I didn't see them when I took the photo," he said. "They only showed up in the image. We're not alone here. We're just not all existing in the same moment, at the same time." I felt sick. How many people were trapped in this loop? How long had they been here? I thought about the woman in the purple jacket, running past us with that focused expression. Was she even aware she was stuck? Or had she been looping for so long that it had become her entire reality? "We need to get off this trail," I said. "Not forward or backward. Off the trail entirely. Into the woods." "I tried that," Levi said. "Walked perpendicular to the trail for what should have been a 1/4 mile. Came out on the trail again, right at this tree." "What if we both go? At the same time? Different directions." We agreed to try. I went north into the forest. Levi went south. We both walked for exactly 15 minutes, timed on our watches, moving directly away from the trail. We both ended up back at the tree, approaching from different directions, arriving within seconds of each other. "This is impossible," Levi said, and he looked like he might cry. "This violates basic physics. Space doesn't work like this." But it was working like this. We were trapped in some kind of spatial anomaly, an endless loop that kept returning us to the same point, no matter what direction we traveled or how far we went. I sat down, suddenly exhausted despite my endurance training. Our bodies can't keep this up forever. Eventually we'll run out of water, nutrition, energy. What happens then? Levi sat down beside me. Maybe that's when we become like the others, the ones in the photo, The ones who've been here so long, they're barely visible anymore. We sat in silence for a while, watching other runners and hikers pass by. Some solid and visible, others translucent, none of them acknowledging our presence. All of them trapped, all of them repeating the same loop over and over. Then something changed. The woman in the purple jacket appeared again, but this time she stopped. She looked directly at us with an expression of shock and relief. "You can see me," she gasped. "You can actually see me. I've been alone for so long. How long have you been here?" "Hours," I said. "You?" "I don't know anymore. Days, maybe." I stopped counting. I just kept running because I didn't know what else to do. 3 of us now, visible to each other. Levi showed her the photo with the shadowy figures. Her face went pale. "We need to do something different," she said. "All of us, at the same time. Maybe if enough of us act in coordination, we can break the loop. We don't know if that will work. We don't know if we'll ever escape. But as I sit here now, watching my GPS insist I've covered 43 miles, while sitting motionless at this tree, I realize that distance doesn't mean what I thought it meant. Progress doesn't mean what I thought it meant. And I wonder how many other trails across the world are caught in loops like this, collecting runners and hikers who never arrive at their destinations, who just keep covering miles that go nowhere forever. Have you ever wondered what's really inside a lightning strike? Storm chasers in the Rhone Highlands captured something on film that defied explanation. Humanoid figures standing motionless inside lightning bolts, and when the team tried to leave, those figures started moving closer with every flash. My name is Atlas, and I'm a storm chaser and meteorologist. For the past 9 years, I pursued severe weather systems across the country, documenting lightning patterns, tornado formations, and extreme atmospheric phenomena for research institutions and documentary productions. I've been within a quarter mile of EF4 tornadoes. I've filmed lightning strikes from distances that make insurance companies refuse to cover my equipment, and I've spent countless nights in my reinforced chase vehicle watching nature's most violent displays. I respect the power of weather, but I've never feared it. Weather follows patterns, obeys physics, operates within predictable parameters, even at its most extreme. What I encountered in the Rhone Highlands last August shattered every assumption I'd held about the natural world. I was tracking an unusual storm system that had meteorologists across the region puzzled. The weather models showed conflicting data, storm cells forming and dissipating in patterns that didn't match any known atmospheric behavior. Lightning strikes were occurring at rates and intensities far beyond what the conditions should produce. The National Weather Service had issued warnings for the area, but they couldn't explain what was causing the anomalous readings. I assembled a small team for the chase. There was Ember, my equipment specialist and videographer, who'd been documenting storms with me for 5 years. There was Finn, an atmospheric physicist from the university who specialized in electrical phenomena and jumped at the chance to observe these unusual readings in person. And there was Cole, our driver and logistics coordinator, who kept us safe and mobile during high-risk chases. We positioned ourselves on a high ridge in the Rhone Highlands around 4 p.m., giving us clear sight lines across the valley where the storm was building. The clouds were already unusual, too dark, too low, moving in patterns that seemed almost purposeful rather than driven by wind currents. The air had that electric quality that comes before major lightning activity, making the hair on our arms stand up even though the storm was still miles away. Ember set up our high-speed cameras, equipment capable of capturing lightning strikes at thousands of frames per second. Finn deployed his electrical field monitors and atmospheric sensors. I coordinated our position and maintained communication with the Weather Service, feeding them real-time observations. Cole kept the vehicle running and monitored our escape routes in case the storm moved toward us faster than predicted. The first lightning strike occurred at 4:37 p.m. A massive bolt that connected cloud to ground about 2 miles away, bright enough to leave after images in our vision even through our protective eyewear. Ember's high-speed camera captured it perfectly. "Got it," she said, already reviewing the footage on her monitor. Then her voice changed. "Wait. Atlas, you need to see this." I moved to look at her screen. She played back the strike in extreme slow motion, the kind of playback that breaks a lightning bolt down into individual frames, showing the progression of the electrical discharge. Lightning typically looks like a jagged line, a path of least resistance through the atmosphere. But this strike looked different. There was something inside it. A shape. Humanoid but wrong. Too tall, proportions that didn't match any living creature. And it wasn't being struck by lightning. It was standing inside the bolt, perfectly still, as if the electrical discharge was forming around it rather than through it. "Equipment malfunction," I suggested, but I didn't believe it. Amber's cameras were top of the line, meticulously maintained. "No malfunction," Finn said quietly. He was staring at his electrical field monitors, with an expression I'd never seen on him before, fear mixed with fascination. "The readings don't make sense. That lightning strike had a sustained duration of 3.2 seconds. Lightning doesn't sustain. It's instantaneous, maybe a few milliseconds for complex strikes. But 3.2 seconds, that's impossible. And the electrical signature was wrong. It wasn't behaving like a standard discharge." Another strike hit, closer this time, maybe a mile away. Ember's camera caught it, and we watched the slow-motion playback together. Same thing. A figure inside the lightning, standing motionless, but this time we could see more detail. It looked vaguely human, head, torso, limbs, but the proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, head tilted at an angle that would break a human neck. "We need to document this," Finn said, his scientific training overriding his obvious unease. "Whatever this is, it's unprecedented. We need multiple angles, different equipment, comparative data." We repositioned our cameras to cover a wider area. The storm was moving closer now, the lightning strikes increasing in frequency. Every single bolt contained one of those figures, sometimes multiple figures in a single strike. They stood motionless, perfectly still, despite being inside electrical discharges, powerful enough to vaporize organic matter. Then, at 4:58 p.m., something changed. A lightning strike hit less than a quarter mile away, close enough that the thunder was almost instantaneous, loud enough to hurt our ears despite our protection. Ember caught it on camera. The figure inside the bolt was closer than any we'd filmed before, clear enough that we could see details that made my stomach turn. Its eyes, or what passed for eyes, were too large, completely black, reflective like insect eyes. Its mouth was open too wide, showing what looked like too many teeth arranged in spiral patterns. And for the first time, it moved. Just slightly. Its head turned toward us. "Did that thing just look at us?" Cole asked, his voice tight. Another strike, even closer. Another figure. This one was definitely oriented toward our position. Its arms, those two long arms, were extended slightly in our direction. "We should go," I said, my chase instincts finally overriding my documentation impulses. "Now." But when Cole turned the key, nothing happened. The vehicle's engine was dead. All our electronics, phones, radios, backup equipment were dead. Only Ember's cameras were still functioning, running on isolated battery systems designed to survive electromagnetic interference. "They're in every strike now," Ember said, pointing at the sky. She was right. The lightning was coming in a circle around our position, a ring of strikes, each one containing multiple figures, all of them oriented toward us. And with each strike, they were closer. Not the lightning strikes themselves. Those maintained their distance. But the figures inside them were moving, advancing through the electrical discharges like people walking through doorways. Finn's voice was shaking when he spoke. "They're using the lightning as transport, as a medium. They're not in our reality normally, but when lightning creates a path, they can use it to cross over. And they've noticed us noticing them. Another strike. The figure inside it was close enough that we could have touched it if we'd reached out. It stood there for the 3.2-second duration of the bolt, those black reflective eyes locked on our position. Then the lightning ended, and the figure vanished. For maybe 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then lightning struck the vehicle. We should have died. A direct lightning strike to a vehicle can generate temperatures of 50,000 degrees, can melt metal, can kill everyone inside instantly. But the strike didn't damage the vehicle. It just held, sustained, that impossible 3.2-second duration. And during those seconds, one of the figures was inside our vehicle with us. I could see it clearly, less than 3 feet away. Its skin, if it was skin, looked like it was made of electrical current, constantly moving, flickering. Its eyes reflected my terrified face back at me. Its mouth was open in that too wide spiral of teeth, and I could hear a sound coming from it, a frequency that made my brain hurt, that felt like it was trying to communicate something my human mind wasn't equipped to understand. Then the lightning ended. The figure vanished. Our vehicle's systems came back online. Cole had the engine started before any of us could process what had happened, and he was driving, crashing through underbrush and over rough terrain, not caring about the equipment we were leaving behind, just trying to get distance between us and that ridge. We made it maybe 2 miles before the storm caught up with us. Lightning strikes all around us, dozens of them, hundreds of them, more lightning activity than should be possible in any natural storm, and every single bolt contained figures, watching us, following us, getting closer. "The lightning rod," Finn shouted suddenly. "Commercial buildings, tall structures, they ground lightning, redirect it. If we can reach something that provides a more attractive target, the strikes might leave us alone." Cole aimed for a communications tower we'd passed on the way up, a tall metal structure on a distant ridge. We drove through conditions that should have been impossible to navigate, with lightning striking so close that the heat was coming through the vehicle's walls, with thunder continuous and deafening, with those figures visible in every flash, reaching for us. We reached the tower at 5:43 p.m. The moment we parked in its shadow, the strikes stopped targeting our vehicle. They hit the tower instead, over and over, hundreds of strikes in the span of minutes. And in every strike, figures climbed down the tower, moving through the metal structure like it was a staircase, descending toward ground level. "Out!" I screamed. "Away from the tower! Run!" We abandoned the vehicle and ran down the ridge, away from the tower, away from the storm. Behind us, lightning strike after lightning strike hit that tower, and through the continuous electrical discharge, we could see dozens of figures descending, gathering, a congregation of things that lived inside electrical phenomena and had found a door into our world. We ran for 40 minutes, stumbling through forest and rough terrain, until we reached a paved road and flagged down a passing truck. The driver thought we were insane, talking about creatures and lightning, but he gave us a ride to the nearest town. By the time we returned to the site 3 days later with park rangers and additional equipment, the storm had passed. The communications tower was undamaged. Our vehicle was undamaged. All our equipment was gone, taken or destroyed. We never found out which. The only thing remaining was Ember's primary camera, the one that had been recording continuously. We reviewed the footage, hours of it. Every lightning strike contained those figures. And in the final frames recorded after we'd fled, the camera had captured something that still gives me nightmares. The figures had reached the ground. They were standing in a circle around the camera, and they were looking directly into the lens, those reflective black eyes staring at whoever would watch the recording later. At us. The footage was confiscated by federal authorities within a week. We were interviewed separately, told that what we'd experienced was explainable through atmospheric phenomena and equipment malfunction, told that discussing it publicly would result in legal consequences. Our research credentials were suspended pending evaluation. But I know what I saw. Finn knows. Ember knows. Cole quit storm chasing entirely and moved to Arizona, as far from severe weather as he could get. Finn stopped researching atmospheric electricity and switched to theoretical physics, trying to find mathematical frameworks that could explain entities existing inside electrical discharges. Ember and I still chase storms sometimes, but we're careful now. We avoid unusual systems, avoid lightning activity that doesn't match established patterns. And when we do film lightning, we always check the footage afterward, frame by frame, looking for shapes that shouldn't be there. Because we know now that we're not alone in the storms. Something lives in the lightning, uses it to travel, uses it to observe our world. And sometimes, if you look too closely, if you document too thoroughly, those things notice you looking back. And when they notice, they want to come closer. They say sound can't travel through time, but what if you heard a mine collapse happening in real time? Screams, warnings, the crushing sound of rock and timber from a disaster that killed 37 men in 1952. What would you do when you realized the voices were calling your name, begging you to warn them, even though they'd been dead for 70 years? My name is Jasper, and I'm an urban explorer and industrial historian. I document abandoned places, factories, hospitals, prisons, mining towns, preserving the visual record of locations that are slowly being reclaimed by nature or demolished for development. It's not just about the photography, though that's part of it. It's about capturing the stories of places before they disappear completely, about understanding the lives that were lived in these spaces before they were abandoned. I'd been researching the old coal mining region in eastern Kentucky for months, studying historical records, mine disaster reports, and property deeds. There was one town in particular that fascinated me, Coopersville, a company mining town that had been completely abandoned in 1953 after a catastrophic mine collapse killed 37 workers. The entire town had been left to decay, with most structures still standing but slowly deteriorating. It was private property, technically off-limits, but I'd obtained permission from the current landowner to document the site. I arrived on a gray October morning, the kind of day where the clouds hang so low they seem to press down on the mountaintops. The town was accessible only by a deteriorating dirt road that probably hadn't seen vehicle traffic in years. My truck barely made it through, scraping over rocks and through ruts that threatened to high-center the vehicle. Coopersville appeared through the trees like a ghost. 30 or 40 structures, company houses, a general store, a schoolhouse, the administrative building, and the massive head frame of the mine itself, still standing against the sky like a gallows. Everything was gray wood and broken windows, vegetation growing through porches and roofs, nature slowly digesting what humans had built. I parked near the edge of town and spent the first few hours photographing the exteriors, documenting the layout, taking notes, architectural details, and the state of decay. The place was profoundly silent. No birds, no wind, no sound of distant traffic. Just my footsteps and breathing and the occasional creak of settling wood. Around noon, I entered the first building, the company store. The interior was remarkably preserved, probably due to the remote location keeping vandals away. Shelves still lined the walls, a few rusted cans and bottles still sitting where they'd been placed decades ago. The counter was intact, an old cash register sitting open and empty. Behind the counter was a calendar, frozen on March 1953. I was photographing the calendar when I heard it. Voices, distant, muffled, but definitely human voices. Multiple people talking, the sound coming from somewhere deeper in the town. My first thought was other explorers, maybe people who'd also gotten permission to visit the site. But something about the voices felt wrong. The quality of the sound was off, like listening to an old radio with poor reception. I couldn't make out words, just the cadence of conversation. I stepped outside, trying to locate the source. The voices seemed to be coming from the direction of the mine headframe. I walked toward it, my camera hanging around my neck, my boots crunching on gravel and debris. As I got closer to the mine, the voices became clearer. Not just conversation, work sounds, metal striking stone, the rumble of machinery, shouts and calls that sounded like men coordinating labor. But the mine had been sealed since 1953. There shouldn't be anyone working there. There couldn't be. I reached the headframe, a massive wooden structure that had once housed the pulley system for lowering men and equipment into the mine shaft. The shaft itself was covered with heavy timbers and posted with warnings about structural instability and toxic gases, but the sounds were definitely coming from below, from inside the sealed mine. I pulled out my audio recorder, a high-quality device I used for documenting ambient sounds in abandoned places. I started recording, and the microphone picked up what my ears were hearing: men's voices, machinery, the distinct sounds of mining operations. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A name. My name. Jasper. Get back from the support beam. The voice was clear, urgent, coming from the shaft below, warning me about something. But how could anyone down there know my name? How could anyone be down there at all? I backed away from the shaft, my rational mind trying to reject what I was experiencing. Audio hallucinations, echoes from some other source. Anything but the impossible explanation that I was hearing sounds from the past. But then the sounds changed. What had been routine work noises shifted abruptly to alarm. Shouting, screaming, a deep, rumbling crash that I felt through the ground beneath my feet. Men yelling for help, yelling warnings, the sound of timber breaking and rock falling. I was hearing the mine collapse, the disaster from 1953. It was playing out in real time right now, as if it was happening at this moment rather than 70 years ago. The screams were terrible. Dozens of men, trapped, crushed, dying. I could hear specific voices calling out names, begging for help, crying out in pain and terror. And through it all, one voice kept repeating my name. Jasper, warn them. You have to warn them before the morning shift. I ran. Pure instinct, no thought, just the overwhelming need to get away from those sounds. I made it maybe 50 yards before I stopped, gasping for breath, and realized the screaming had stopped. The mine was silent again. Everything was silent. I checked my audio recorder. It was still running. I rewound to what I'd just experienced and played it back. Every sound was there. The work noises, the warning with my name, the collapse, the screaming, all of it captured in perfect clarity. I should have left. Every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to get in my truck and never come back. But I'm a documentarian. I record things. And this, whatever this was, needed to be documented, understood, explained. I walked back toward the mine, slower this time, my recorder still running. As I approached the head frame, the sound started again, but not the collapse this time. Earlier sounds, men arriving for work, greeting each other, discussing the day's tasks, morning sounds, the beginning of a shift. And I realized what I was hearing. This was the morning of the disaster, March 17th, 1953, the day 37 men went into this mine and never came out. The sounds were cycling, replaying, trapped in this location like a recording playing on an endless loop. I stood near the shaft and listened as the morning progressed. Routine work sounds for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Time seemed fluid, inconsistent. Then I heard it again. My name. Jasper. A different voice this time, calmer. You can hear us, can't you? Across all these years. You're listening. Who are you? I asked out loud, feeling foolish but unable to stop myself. My name was Thomas Mercer, foreman. I died here with 36 others. But before I died, I saw something. A vision, maybe, of a man who would come here someday. A man who could hear us. Jasper. How do you know my name? Time doesn't work the same way here. Past, present, future. They're all mixed together in this place. I saw you before you were born. I saw you standing here, listening, and I need you to understand something important." The sounds around his voice intensified, work resuming, men moving deeper into the mine. "We knew the mine was dangerous," Thomas continued. "The company knew. There were warnings, structural issues that should have been addressed, but they kept us working because coal was profitable and our lives were cheap. 37 men died because of greed and negligence." "I'm sorry," I said, not knowing what else to say. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." "Don't be sorry, remember. That's all we ask. Remember that we were here. Remember that we died. Remember that our deaths weren't accidents. They were murders dressed up as industrial accidents. Will you do that, Jasper?" "Yes. I'll document everything. I'll make sure people know what happened here." "Thank you. Now you need to leave. The cycle is about to repeat. When the collapse happens again, the boundary between then and now becomes thin. Too thin. If you're here when it happens, you might not be able to leave. You might get caught in the loop with us." I didn't need to be told twice. I started backing away from the shaft. Behind me, I could hear the sounds building. Toward the disaster. Timber creaking, rock shifting, men's voices rising in alarm as they realized something was wrong. I ran for my truck as the screaming started again. This time it was louder, closer, as if the dying men were right behind me. I could hear footsteps chasing me, voices calling my name, begging me to help them, to save them, to warn them, even though it was 70 years too late. I reached my truck and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The sounds from the mine were impossibly loud now. The screaming, the crushing, the dying, and underneath it all, a deeper sound, the rumble of collapsing earth, moving, spreading, as if the disaster was expanding beyond its original boundaries. The engine started. I threw the truck into gear and drove, not caring about the rough road, just focused on getting distance between myself and that cursed place. In my rear-view mirror, I saw dust rising from the direction of the mine, as if the collapse was happening physically, not just in sound. I made it back to the main road and didn't stop driving until I was 2 counties away. When I finally pulled over and checked my audio recorder, I had 4 hours of recordings, all of it clear, all of it undeniable. I published my documentation, the photographs, the audio recordings, the historical research connecting what I'd heard to the actual disaster in 1953. Most people dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, but historians verified that the names I'd captured in the audio matched the names of men who died in that collapse. Details about the structural failures I'd heard Thomas describe matched investigation reports that hadn't been digitized, that I shouldn't have had access to. The property owner sealed the entire site after my visit, citing safety concerns. No one is allowed there now, but sometimes I still hear the voices, especially on quiet nights. The screaming, the warning, Thomas calling my name across the decades, and I wonder how many other disaster sites carry echoes like this. How many tragedies replay themselves over and over, trapped in the places where they occurred, waiting for someone who can hear them to remember, to bear witness, to ensure that the dead aren't forgotten along with the ruins they left behind. When every living creature in a 5-mile radius evacuates an area within 48 hours, birds, deer, bears, even insects, you know something terrible is coming. A wildlife researcher stayed behind to document why they were fleeing, and on the 3rd night, she finally saw what had cleared the valley of all life except her. My name is Willow, and I'm a wildlife biologist specializing in animal behavior and migration patterns. For the past 8 years, I've studied how animals respond to environmental changes, how they communicate danger to each other, how they make collective decisions about when to flee and where to go. I've documented their responses to forest fires, to severe weather events, to human encroachment. I understand animal behavior, or at least I thought I did until last September in Pisgah National Forest. I'd been conducting a long-term study on black bear populations in a remote valley, a pristine area about 12 miles from the nearest trail, accessible only by a difficult cross-country hike. I'd set up a research camp there in early spring, a sturdy tent, solar panels for my equipment, camera traps positioned throughout the valley, and motion sensors that tracked animal movements. Over 6 months, I'd documented thriving populations of bears, deer, wild turkeys, countless smaller mammals, and dense bird populations. The valley was ecologically rich, exactly the kind of habitat that should support abundant wildlife year-round. On September 14th, something changed. I woke up that morning to absolute silence. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, no distant sounds of larger mammals moving through the forest. Just complete, oppressive silence. As a biologist, I knew immediately that something was wrong. Healthy forests are never silent during daylight hours. I checked my camera traps, downloading the footage from the previous 24 hours. What I saw made no sense. Starting around midnight, every animal within camera range had begun moving in the same direction, east, away from the valley. Not running, not panicked, but moving with clear purpose. Deer, bears, raccoons, possums, even foxes that normally avoid larger animals, all of them traveling together in the same direction, leaving the valley. By noon on September 14th, I hadn't seen or heard a single animal. I hiked the perimeter of my research area, checking all my monitoring stations. Empty. All of them. Even the insects were gone. No mosquitoes, no flies, no ants. I'd never seen or heard of anything like this. Mass animal evacuations happen before earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, but there was no seismic activity in this region. No geological explanation for what I was witnessing. The scientist in me knew I should leave, follow the animals to safety, trust their instincts that had evolved over millions of years to detect danger. But the researcher in me couldn't abandon this opportunity. Whatever was happening was unprecedented. I had equipment. I had cameras. I had the training to document and analyze this phenomenon. I decided to stay for 72 hours, document whatever was driving this behavior, and then evacuate. That was my first mistake. September 15th brought more of the same eerie silence. I spent the day repositioning my cameras, setting up additional motion sensors, collecting environmental data, air quality, radiation levels, ground vibrations, anything that might explain the evacuation. All readings were normal. The forest was perfectly healthy by every measurable standard. It was just empty of animal life. That night, around 11 p.m., my motion sensors detected something. I reviewed the alerts on my laptop. 3 sensors had triggered in sequence, showing movement from west to east across the valley, the opposite direction the animals had fled. Something large was moving through the forest. Something that traveled differently than any animal I'd studied. The motion sensors showed sustained activation lasting 3 to 4 minutes each, suggesting whatever triggered them was moving slowly, methodically. I grabbed my thermal imaging camera and stepped outside my tent. The night was moonless, absolutely dark under the forest canopy. I scanned the tree line with the thermal camera, looking for heat signatures. Nothing. No animals. No warm-blooded life of any kind. But my motion sensors were still triggering, one after another tracking movement that was getting closer to my camp. I should have been terrified, but I was too focused on the scientific impossibility of what I was observing. Something was moving through the forest, triggering motion sensors designed to detect anything larger than a rabbit, but producing no thermal signature. That shouldn't be possible. Every living creature generates heat. The sensors closest to my camp triggered. Whatever it was less than 100 yards away now. I aimed my thermal camera in that direction and saw nothing but cold forest. Then I switched to my night vision scope, and my scientific curiosity evaporated, replaced by pure primal fear. It was there, between the trees, massive, at least 12 feet tall, maybe more. The night vision scope showed it in shades of green, A bipedal form that moved with a fluidity that was profoundly wrong. Its limbs bent at joints that didn't match any known animal. Its head swiveled too far, too smoothly. And even through the limited resolution of night vision, I could see it was looking directly at my camp, directly at me. I backed slowly toward my tent, keeping the scope trained on the figure. It didn't advance, didn't retreat, just stood there, watching. After several minutes that felt like hours, it turned and moved away, disappearing deeper into the forest. My motion sensors tracked its retreat, showing it moving back toward the western edge of the valley. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my tent with every light on, reviewing the footage from my cameras, trying to capture an image of what I'd seen. But the creature had moved through areas between my camera placements, staying just outside their fields of view. The only evidence I had was the motion sensor data showing something large moving through the valley, and my own terrified memory of that impossible shape between the trees. September 16th. I knew I should leave. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to pack up and hike out immediately. But I was also aware that I'd seen something potentially unprecedented, something that might explain why animals had evolved such sophisticated threat detection instincts. I decided to stay one more night, to set up additional cameras, to try to capture clear footage. That was my second mistake. I spent the day repositioning all my equipment, creating overlapping fields of camera coverage, setting motion sensors in a dense grid pattern that nothing could pass through undetected. I barely ate, running on adrenaline and scientific obsession. By evening, I had the most comprehensive monitoring setup I'd ever deployed. If that thing returned, I would have clear footage from multiple angles. Night fell. I sat in my tent, watching feeds from 8 different cameras on my laptop, my thermal imager within reach, my satellite phone ready to call for extraction if needed. The forest remained silent and empty. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. At 1:47 a.m., every single motion sensor triggered simultaneously. Not in sequence, not tracking movement, all of them at once, as if something massive had appeared everywhere in the valley at the same instant. My laptop screen filled with alerts. My cameras activated, recording from every angle. And then I heard it. A sound that no living creature should be able to make. A low-frequency rumble that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. It resonated through the ground, through the trees, through my bones. And underneath that rumble, something else. Clicks and tones and patterns that sounded almost like communication, like language, but operating at frequencies that human ears barely register. I looked at my camera feeds. Every single one showed the same thing. The creature. Not between the trees this time. Standing in full view. And there wasn't just one. There were dozens of them, surrounding my camp in a perfect circle, all facing inward, all absolutely motionless. My thermal imager still showed nothing. These things generated no heat signature. They were the same temperature as the ambient environment, as if they were made of the forest itself rather than living tissue. The largest one, directly in front of my tent, began to move. It approached with that same fluid, wrong motion I'd seen the night before. Closer, closer, until it was standing just feet from my tent wall. I could see details now through the camera, skin or surface that looked like bark and stone and shadow all merged together. Eyes that reflected the infrared camera light like an animal's, but too many of them, arranged in patterns that didn't match any biological structure. It reached out with something that might have been a hand, or might have been a branch, or might have been something I had no reference for. It touched my tent, and the moment it made contact, all my electronics died. Cameras, laptop, lights, satellite phone, everything. Complete electrical failure. I was alone in absolute darkness, separated from that thing by a layer of fabric, listening to it move around my tent. The rumbling sound was constant now, vibrating through everything, and I understood, with a clarity that bypassed rational thought, that this was what the animals had fled from. This was the danger their instincts had detected days before my instruments picked up anything. I don't know how long it stood there. In absolute darkness, time becomes meaningless, but eventually the rumbling stopped. The sense of presence faded. I waited until I saw the first light of dawn through my tent fabric before I dared to move. My camp was destroyed, not violently. There was no damage to my tent or equipment, but every electronic device was dead, completely non-functional. Solar panels, batteries, cameras, laptop, phone, all of them would never work again. It was as if something had erased their ability to function. I packed only the essentials and hiked out, 12 miles of difficult terrain covered in 6 hours, driven by fear and the knowledge that I'd stayed far too long in a place that had been cleared of life for a reason. When I reached civilization and reported what I'd seen, the responses varied. Park rangers were concerned but skeptical. My department colleagues suggested equipment malfunction and stress-induced hallucinations. Federal Wildlife Services asked pointed questions and then classified my report in ways that made it clear they didn't want it discussed publicly. But 3 weeks later, a ranger told me something off the record. The valley I'd been studying had been found completely devoid of vegetation. Every plant, every tree, every blade of grass, gone. The ground was bare mineral soil, as if the entire ecosystem had been erased. And in the center of the valley, there were impressions in the soil, large circular depressions arranged in patterns. They sealed the area. No explanation given to the public. Just a sudden closure of a remote section of Pisgah National Forest that no one except researchers ever visited anyway. I don't study animal behavior anymore. I work in a lab now, analyzing data other people collect, because I understand now that there are things in the forest that animals know to flee from, things that their instincts recognize even when human science sees nothing wrong. And I learned that when every living creature abandons an area, you don't stay behind to document why. You run, as fast and as far as those animals did, because they know something we've forgotten, that we're not the apex predator we think we are. And some territories belong to things that clear the land of all life before they settle in to feed. Being buried alive in snow is terrifying enough, but what if something else survived the avalanche with you? For 14 hours, a winter climber lay trapped and immobilized, listening to something tunnel through the snow toward him. Something that breathed, something that was getting closer with every passing minute, and something his helmet camera was recording the entire time. My name is Sterling, and I'm a mountaineer and alpine climbing guide. I've summited peaks across 3 continents, guided hundreds of clients through technical climbs, and survived situations that would have killed less experienced climbers. I know mountains, their moods, their dangers, their deceptive beauty that hides 1,000 ways to die. Avalanches are always a risk in winter climbing, something you assess, plan for, and respect. But you can do everything right and still end up in the wrong place when a mountain decides to move. That's what happened to me on Mount LeConte last January. I was attempting a solo winter ascent of the East Face, a technical climb that's challenging but manageable in the right conditions. I'd checked the avalanche forecast, moderate risk, but nothing that warranted canceling the climb. I'd studied the route, identified safe zones, carried all the proper safety equipment, including an avalanche beacon, probe, shovel, and helmet camera that recorded continuously for insurance and training purposes. The weather was stable when I started at dawn. Clear skies, minimal wind, temperature around 15 degrees. Cold but ideal for the climb. I made good progress, reaching the halfway point by noon. That's when I noticed the subtle signs that conditions were changing. The snow had a different texture underfoot. Small surface slides on nearby slopes. A hollow sound when I tested the snowpack. I was assessing whether to continue or descend when I heard it. That deep settling whoomp sound that every mountaineer dreads. Avalanche precursor. The snowpack destabilizing. I had maybe seconds to react. I tried to move laterally toward an outcropping of rock that might provide shelter, but I wasn't fast enough. The slope above me released. Not a massive avalanche. This wasn't a wall of snow traveling at highway speeds, but it was enough. Several thousand pounds of snow and ice cascading down, catching me, sweeping me off my feet, tumbling me down the mountain. Avalanche training teaches you to try to swim in the moving snow, to fight your way toward the surface, to create an air pocket around your face before the snow sets. I did all of that, but when the movement stopped and the snow hardened around me, I was completely immobilized. My arms were trapped against my body. My legs were locked in position. I could move my head slightly, maybe 2 inches in any direction. That was it. I did a quick assessment. I was alive. I could breathe. The air pocket technique had worked, giving me a small cavity around my face. I could move my jaw enough to speak. My avalanche beacon was transmitting. My helmet camera was still recording. I could feel its slight weight and hear the barely perceptible hum of its operation. But I was buried, probably under several feet of snow based on the complete darkness and the pressure I felt. And I was alone. Solo climbing means no immediate rescue. Someone would notice I hadn't returned eventually, would organize a search, would triangulate my beacon signal. But that could take hours, maybe a full day. I tried to stay calm, to conserve oxygen, to wait. The cold was immediate and penetrating. Snow is an insulator, which would prevent me from freezing quickly, but I was trapped in a position that prevented me from generating body heat through movement. Hypothermia was inevitable. It was just a question of whether rescue arrived before it killed me. I'd been buried maybe 20 minutes when I heard the first sound. Movement. Not wind, not settling snow. Deliberate movement. Something pushing through the snow somewhere nearby. My first thought was rescue, that somehow a search team had been deployed impossibly fast. But that didn't make sense. No voices, no sounds of digging equipment, just this sustained pushing movement through packed snow. "Hello?" I called out, my voice muffled by the snow around my face. "I'm here. I'm buried." The movement stopped. Complete silence. Then it started again, and this time I could tell it was closer. Whatever was moving through the snow was coming toward me. "I'm here," I called again. "Keep coming. Follow my voice." But there were still no voices in response. No human sounds at all. Just that methodical pushing, scraping movement. And something else. Breathing. I could hear breathing. Deep, raspy, definitely not human. Fear cut through my relief. What animal would be active in these conditions, at this elevation tunneling through avalanche debris? Bears were hibernating. Mountain goats would have moved to lower elevations. Nothing should be here. The breathing got louder, closer. I could hear snow being displaced, being pushed aside. Whatever this was, it was tunneling directly toward me with purpose, like it knew exactly where I was. "Stay away," I shouted, trying to put authority in my voice despite my helpless position. "Get back." The movement paused again, then continued faster now, more aggressive. I could hear it clearly. Something large, forcing its way through the snow. Something that breathed in wet, labored gasps. Something that was maybe 10 feet away now. 8 feet. 6 feet. I struggled against the snow that held me, accomplishing nothing except exhausting myself and consuming precious oxygen. I was completely helpless, unable to move, unable to defend myself, unable to do anything except listen as something impossible tunneled toward my immobilized body. Then I felt it. Contact. Something touched my boot, the only part of me that must have been near the edge of whatever tunnel this thing was creating. The touch was exploratory, like an animal investigating something unfamiliar. But the breathing, that raspy, wet breathing, was wrong. No animal I knew made sounds like that. It grabbed my boot and pulled. Not gently, not a rescue effort. A predatory pull testing my weight, assessing whether it could extract me from the snow. The snow around my legs cracked slightly from the pressure, but I remained stuck. The thing pulled harder. I could feel its strength, feel it bracing itself for leverage. "Help!" I screamed, not caring any more about conserving oxygen. "Someone help me. There's something here." The pulling stopped, but I could still hear it breathing, could feel its presence right next to my trapped legs. Then it started digging around me, not trying to free me, trying to expose more of me. I felt snow being cleared from around my right leg, then my hip, creating space in the confined burial chamber. And then I felt it climb onto me. Weight, substantial weight settling onto my trapped body. Something large positioning itself on top of me. It's breathing now directly above my chest. I couldn't see it. The snow around my face was still intact, but I could hear it, feel it, smell it. A rotten, organic smell like decay and musk combined. It lowered itself closer. I could feel its breath now, hot and fetid, somehow reaching through the small gaps in the snow around my face. And I could hear something else, a sound coming from it that was almost like words, like language, but wrong. Guttural and wet and formed in a throat that wasn't shaped for human speech. My helmet camera was recording everything. The audio would be capturing all of it. The breathing, the movement, whatever sounds this thing was making. That thought gave me a strange comfort. If I died here, at least there would be evidence, proof that something impossible had been in this snow with me. The thing stayed on top of me for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. I could feel it shifting its weight, moving in ways that suggested it was examining me, studying me. At one point, it pressed something against the snow near my face, something hard and cold that might have been a limb or appendage, testing the barrier, determining if it could reach me. Then suddenly, it was gone. The weight lifted. I heard it moving away, tunneling back in the direction it had come from. The breathing faded, and I was alone again in the dark, cold snow. I don't know how long I waited after that. Time became meaningless. I focused on breathing slowly, on not panicking, on staying conscious despite the cold and the fear and the exhaustion. The thing didn't return, but I kept expecting it to. Kept listening for that raspy breathing, for the sound of something tunneling through the snow. When I finally heard voices, real human voices, I almost didn't believe they were real. But then there were hands digging around my face, clearing snow, letting in light and fresh air. A rescue team had found my beacon signal. They'd been searching for 11 hours. They extracted me carefully, treating me for moderate hypothermia and minor injuries from the initial avalanche. They were professional, efficient, relieved to find me alive. And they didn't mention anything about finding unusual tracks or tunnels in the snow around my burial site. I didn't mention it either. Not then. I was too cold, too exhausted, too aware of how crazy it would sound. But I asked them to preserve my helmet camera, told them it was important for insurance and incident analysis. 3 days later, after I'd been released from the hospital, I reviewed the footage. 14 hours of recording from inside an avalanche burial. Most of it was darkness and muffled audio. But the sections where the thing had been present were clear enough. The breathing was there, the digging sounds, the movement. And at one point, when it had been directly above me, the camera had captured something. Just a few frames, so brief I had to watch in slow motion. A shape, backlit by dim light filtering through the snow. Large, quadrupedal maybe, but with a profile that didn't match any known animal. And eyes, reflective eyes that caught the camera's recording light for just a fraction of a second. I submitted the footage to the rescue organization, to wildlife authorities, to anyone who might have an explanation. Most dismissed it as audio artifacts and visual aberrations caused by the camera's position and the refraction of light through snow. But one wildlife biologist looked at it for a long time before telling me something I haven't been able to forget. "There are animals that follow avalanches," he said quietly. "Scavengers that know avalanches trap prey. but they don't tunnel. They wait for natural exposure. Whatever this is, it's hunting differently, more actively, more intelligently. He asked me not to share the footage publicly, said it would cause unnecessary panic, that there was no way to verify what it showed. But he also asked me exactly where on Mount LeConte I'd been buried. 2 weeks later, that section of the mountain was closed to winter climbing. No official explanation, just a quiet closure of specific routes. And when I checked with other climbing guides, 3 of them mentioned clients reporting unusual sounds during winter climbs in that area. Breathing sounds, movement in the snow that had no source. I still climb, but I won't go solo in winter anymore. And I won't go anywhere near Mount LeConte, because I know now that avalanches aren't the only thing buried in mountain snow, waiting for the right moment to dig itself free and find its next meal. Step through the wrong fog bank, and you might find yourself in a version of reality where time runs backward, the sun sets in the east, and every hiker who crossed before you is still there, trapped and searching for a way home. The question isn't whether you'll find the fog, it's whether you'll realize you've crossed through it before it's too late to go back. My name is Ryder, and I'm a geographic information systems specialist who maps remote trails for the National Park Service. My job involves hiking into backcountry areas with GPS equipment, marking coordinates, documenting trail conditions, and updating digital maps that help keep hikers safe. It's methodical work that requires attention to detail and a solid understanding of navigation technology. I've mapped hundreds of miles of trails across a dozen national parks, and I've never gotten lost. My equipment doesn't fail. My coordinates are always accurate, until the fog line on Clingman's Dome. I was conducting a routine mapping survey of a lesser-used trail system in the Great Smoky Mountains in late October. The area around Clingman's Dome is popular with tourists who drive to the observation tower, but the trail network extending into the backcountry sees much less traffic. I was documenting a section that hadn't been officially surveyed in over 15 years, taking fresh coordinates and photographs for the park's digital database. The morning started clear and cold, perfect conditions for the work. I'd covered about 4 miles by 11 a.m., making good progress when I noticed the fog. It appeared suddenly, which isn't unusual in the Smokies. Fog can form rapidly when conditions align. But this fog had a characteristic I'd never seen before. It had a boundary line, not a gradual thickening or fading, but a sharp, distinct edge. On one side, clear visibility. On the other side, dense white fog. The boundary was so precise it looked artificial, like someone had drawn a line across the landscape and filled one side with fog while leaving the other untouched. I approached the boundary carefully, professionally curious about this unusual meteorological phenomenon. I took photographs, noted the coordinates, and observed that the fog line ran roughly north-south for as far as I could see in both directions. The trail I was mapping crossed directly through it. Standard protocol would be to wait for the fog to clear before continuing, but I was on a schedule. I had proper navigation equipment, and the trail on the other side was visible for about 30 feet before the fog obscured it. I made the decision to continue through. The fog bank couldn't be more than 100 yards deep. I stepped across the boundary. The temperature dropped immediately, maybe 10 degrees. The fog was dense and damp, reducing visibility to about 15 feet. But I had my GPS, and the trail was well defined underfoot. I continued forward, watching my GPS coordinates update with each step, confirming I was staying on course. After about 5 minutes of walking, I should have emerged from the fog. Instead, it remained just as dense. I checked my GPS. According to the device, I'd covered nearly a quarter mile, but the fog showed no signs of thinning. I decided to continue a bit further, assuming the fog bank was deeper than I'd estimated. 10 minutes, half a mile, according to my GPS. Still dense fog. This was unusual but not impossible. I'd seen fog banks that stretched for miles, but something else was bothering me. The quality of light was wrong. When I'd entered the fog, it had been late morning, sun high in the sky, even if obscured. But the light around me now had a late afternoon quality, golden and angled. I stopped and checked my watch. It showed 11:47 a.m., which matched my expectations. But the light didn't match. I pulled out my compass for a directional reference and felt my first real spike of concern. According to my compass, the sun was in the east, but it was almost noon. The sun should be nearly overhead, slightly south. It shouldn't be in the east unless it was early morning, but my watch said late morning, and the light quality said late afternoon. Something was fundamentally wrong. I made the decision to turn back, to return the way I'd come and exit the fog the same way I'd entered. I did a precise 180-degree turn using my compass and started walking back along the trail. My GPS should have shown me retracing my steps, coordinates reversing toward the fog boundary. Instead, my GPS showed me continuing forward, deeper into the mapped area, coordinates still incrementing rather than reversing. That's when I heard the voices. "Hello? Is someone there? I'm lost." A woman's voice, somewhere ahead in the fog. Another hiker, probably disoriented by the same fog bank. "I'm here," I called back. "Stay where you are. I'll come to you." I moved toward the voice and found her within a minute. She was maybe 30 years old, wearing hiking gear that looked expensive and well-maintained. She had a backpack, trekking poles, all the right equipment. But her face showed relief mixed with confusion. "Thank God," she said. "I've been walking for hours. I can't find my way out of this fog. My GPS stopped making sense." "When did you enter the fog?" I asked. "This morning, around 9. I've been trying to get back to the trailhead ever since." I checked my watch. 11:52 a.m. She'd been in the fog for nearly 3 hours. "What's your name?" "Aspen. I'm from Nashville. I drove up yesterday for a day hike. This fog came out of nowhere." "I'm Ryder. I'm a trail mapper for the Park Service. My GPS is malfunctioning too, but I have a compass. If we navigate by cardinal directions rather than the trail, we should be able to walk out in a straight line." She nodded, eager to follow someone who seemed to have a plan. We started walking due west, which should have taken us back toward the main trail system and parking areas. My compass held steady, showing consistent western heading, but after 20 minutes of walking, we encountered another hiker. He was older, maybe 60, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent a lifetime outdoors, and he looked shocked to see us. "You can see me?" he asked. "You can actually see me?" "Of course we can see you," I said. "Are you lost too?" "I've been in this fog for 2 days," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I haven't seen anyone else. I thought I was the only one here. My name's Blake. I came up here last Thursday for a solo hike. I felt cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Today is Saturday, October 23rd. You're saying you've been in this fog since Thursday?" "Yes. And I've seen the same landmarks over and over, the same distinctive trees, the same rock formations. I'm walking in circles, even though my compass says I'm going straight." Aspen grabbed my arm. "What's happening? Why is his GPS date wrong?" "It's not wrong," Blake said quietly. "Or it is, but not in the way you think. What date does your phone show?" Aspen pulled out her phone. "October 23rd, Saturday." "That's what mine said when I entered the fog. Thursday, October 21st, but look at it now." He showed us his phone. The date displayed was October 19th, Tuesday, 2 days before he'd entered the fog. "That's impossible," I said, but even as I spoke, I was checking my own phone. It showed October 23rd, as expected. But as I watched, the date flickered, changed. Now it showed October 22nd, Friday. "Time doesn't work right here," Blake said. "I figured that out on my first day, or what I thought was my first day. The sun moves wrong, sets in the east, rises in the west. Sometimes it goes backward across the sky, and my phone date keeps changing, always going backward, never forward." I pulled out my GPS unit and checked the date stamp on my coordinate logs. The most recent entry, taken just moments ago, was dated October 20th. but I'd entered the fog on October 23rd. My earlier coordinates showed dates progressing forward chronologically as I'd walked my route. But after crossing the fog line, they'd started going backward. "We're in some kind of temporal anomaly," I said, trying to apply scientific reasoning to something that defied science. "The fog line is a boundary. Crossing it puts you into a space where time runs differently." "So, how do we get out?" Aspen asked. That's when we heard more voices, multiple people calling out, some asking for help, others just talking to themselves. We moved toward the sounds and found them. 6 more hikers, scattered across maybe a 100-yard area, all trapped in the fog, all with stories of crossing the fog line on different days and being unable to find their way back. There was Nova, who'd entered 3 days ago. There was Wade, who'd been here for a week. There was Luna, who insisted she'd only been in the fog for an hour, but whose phone showed a date from 2 weeks prior. All of them had tried navigating out. All of them had failed. "The fog line moves," Wade explained. He was a surveyor, like me, someone who understood precision navigation. "I've been mapping it. Every time I get close to where the boundary should be, it's not there anymore. Or it is there, but crossing it just loops you back into the fog from a different direction. We're not trapped in a space. We're trapped in a temporal loop that's disconnected from normal reality." Over the next several hours, or what felt like hours, though time had lost meaning, we compared notes, shared observations, tried to find patterns. We were all experienced hikers. We all had proper equipment. We'd all made the same simple decision to walk through an unusual fog bank. And now we were all trapped in a version of the Smoky Mountains where the sun moved wrong, where time ran backward, where our phones and GPS units showed impossible data, and where the fog line that had trapped us couldn't be found no matter which direction we walked. "There have to be others," I said, thinking about all the missing person reports from this area over the years. People who crossed the fog and never made it back. Blake nodded grimly. "I found evidence, old campsites, abandoned gear, and once I found a journal from 1997, a hiker who'd been trapped for months, documenting everything, trying to find a way out. The entries just stopped in December 1997, but the last entry said something that stuck with me." "What did it say?" "The fog is getting thicker. The other trapped hikers are harder to see now. We're fading into different phases of the same trap. Soon we won't be able to see each other at all. We'll all be alone in the fog, walking forever, never finding the line." As if responding to his words, the fog around us began to thicken. Nova, who'd been standing maybe 10 feet away, started to look translucent. Wade's voice seemed to be coming from further away, even though he hadn't moved. "It's happening," Luna said, her voice fading. "We're phasing apart, just like the journal said." I grabbed my GPS unit and started recording coordinates, documenting everything, leaving a data trail that someone might find someday, because I understood now that we weren't getting out. The fog line had caught us, would keep catching hikers who made the same innocent decision to walk through unusual fog, and would trap us all in separate temporal phases, where we'd walk forever in mountains that looked right but felt wrong, under a sun that moved backward, on dates that would never reach the future. The last thing I recorded before the others faded completely from view was a message for anyone who finds this data. If you see fog with a sharp boundary line, don't cross it. No matter how clear the path looks on the other side, no matter how good your navigation equipment is, the fog line doesn't trap your body. It traps your time. And once you're inside, there's no coming back to the world you left. I'm still here, still walking, still hoping that someday the fog will clear or the line will reappear. But my phone shows October 19th now, and yesterday it showed October 20th, and time keeps moving backward while I walk forward through fog that never ends. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're hearing my story, learn from my mistake. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Some fog hides more than just the trail ahead. If these true Appalachian horror stories kept you up at night, Don't forget to subscribe to Haunted Fears and turn on notifications, because there are more terrifying encounters waiting in the deep woods. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Would you cross the fog line? Hit that like button if these stories gave you chills, and remember, the mountains are always watching, always waiting. Stay safe out there, or don't go out there at all.